thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for adapting to the new location, and we hope to make this a smoother process in the future as far as getting in and getting badged up and stuff. So thanks for your patience with as we adjust to the new location. Thanks to 80 Way for letting us use your facility, use your building. We appreciate them hosting the school facilities for us. Staff, will start with the roll.
Carmen Wyckoff.
Here.
Helene Landon.
Here.
Tom Russian.
Here.
John McCarthy.
Here.
Sandy Williams.
Here.
Jim Chang.
Here.
Scott Thompson. Here. Let the record show that Board Member Rice is not present at this time. He said he will be here shortly. Also, staff would like to formalize the recusal process, so we will conduct it each meeting in a roll call format. Board Member Wyckoff, do you have a conflict with any agenda item that requires your recusal from any vote?
E10 for Tucson Roofing and E25 for Yuma 1 Elementary.
Please state the reason for your conflict and recusal.
Coworker is working on those.
Board Member Landon, do you have a conflict with any agenda item that requires your recusal from any vote?
I do not.
Board Member Russian, do you have a conflict with any agenda item that requires your recusal from any vote?
No.
Chairman McCarthy, do you have a conflict with any agenda item that requires your recusal from any vote?
Negative.
Board Member Williams, do you have a conflict with any agenda item that requires your recusal from any vote? Board Member Chang, do you have a conflict with any agenda item that requires your recusal from any vote?
No.
Board Member Thompson, do you have a conflict with any agenda item that requires your recusal from any vote?
Yes, I do. E6 and H7.
Please state the reason for your conflict and recusal.
I'm employed by Mason Public School.
Thank you, board members. Chairman McCarthy, time's yours.
Mr. Chair, just to review there, Mr. Thompson, there's E6, and what was the second one?
H7.
Very good. Okay. We have several minutes to review. We have January 10 and January 8 to include the executive session. So we're looking for a motion to approve the minutes as presented by staff on those all of the minutes as presented in item B.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Williams, second by Ms. Wyckoff. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Guys have it. Okay. We have a director's report, and so with that, we'll turn over to our interim director, Mr. Andy Tobin, who just from the board position, just going to quickly introduce Mr. Tobin. Mr. Tobin is the director of the Department of Administration, and change in leadership. He was appointed by the governor to be the acting interim director of the School Facilities Board. So we welcome him to the board, and I'll give you the opportunity to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. My name is Andy Tobin. I've been appointed by the governor, but only just recently confirmed it last week, I think, in the Senate. So I guess that's a good step in the right direction before I get into the second half. So, for those who are looking at me, yes, it's laser treatment for cancer. Sean has not been beating me up for 2 years, although he has tried. So anyhow, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to assist and be part of this process. We're grateful to the staff who I've noticed worked extremely hard to bring these agendas to your table. And I'm especially grateful to the work that the board does. I can see that it is extremely time consuming, somewhat harrowing at moments, I'm sure. And I would be remiss if I didn't go out of my way to say thank you for the time you spent. And I'm not one of those that asks for forgiveness before permission, but I'll already ask for your forgiveness for that as things go forward, because I'm likely to miss things, and I'll look forward to having you correct me, maybe as early as this morning. So I think I like the idea. I don't know if we've had this conversation on the internet before. If this is something that I've been able to do this in past places that I've worked, and I think the public appreciates it as well. So thank you for accommodating us by joining us here. I think it's very helpful. I have several folks from ADOA who are here this morning, all just volunteers wanting to be of help and service to this board. in this agency, so I'm very grateful that they're here. I think you'll hear from some of them this morning. The council's here. If anyone from Radio A just wants to stand up, council. I think you know Megan Rose. Mrs. Rose is here with communications. And I have Matt Hanson, who's grants administration, and Nick Loper, who's an executive at my disposal here at ADOA, who's helping us together. So I thank them for all their work. So,
Thanks, Mr. Tobin. Well, on behalf of the board, welcome
great.
to the team. Look forward to working with you as we have with staff. It's always been a staff-driven agency, with board members say, and so continue to look forward to finding ways that we can help staff drive the ball. There's a lot to unravel. SFP is a layered, pretty complex organization, and so we'll try to not blow through these items maybe as quickly as we sometimes do in order to make sure you're still well loved. But otherwise, this is the part of the meeting where we turn it over to staff. We'll let staff drive.
Yeah, I was just curious. This is where I jump in on my, we go to communications and we go into my.
Yes, sir.
See, already have to fix one. Your turn.
I'm Deborah Showing, Assistant Attorney General, Counsel for the SFB. I've been asked to discuss with you the revised communications policy. As the board is aware, they've had several communication policies in the past. The purpose of this policy specifically is from a legal perspective. The open meeting law requires that any communication plan ensure that any member of a public board does not communicate with a quorum of the board outside of a public meeting on issues that are expected to come before the board. The new plan makes this simpler and more direct. Each board member will have their own email address. The public can then, under their biography, the public can then contact them direct, contact them back, and work with the staff on further steps. This will make it easier to ensure that unintentionally a quorum does not become involved in any discussion or any email stream. Are there any questions?
Questions for Ms. Sterling on this?
So currently we have one email address that goes to Dave, that's going to change.
Yes, that will change. Each board member will have their own email address. It'll be under their biography on the website.
Mr. Chair, is it possible to find a way to create a forwarding setup for that email address?
The way it's set up, Chairman McCarthy, is that when the emails are sent to each individual board member, and this is all in the policy that you guys will be reviewing and looking at today and making a decision on, you will have the option as a board member to respond directly to that member of the public, or to forward that information and that email to me and ask that I respond to that member of the public. So you will have the option to do either one. If it's an inquiry from a member of the media, those will all be forwarded to me for review with staff and for response to the media.
And so for those of you who may not be familiar with this, there's always been this conflict of how do we address people who want to speak to the board members individually without making public private email addresses, because otherwise we're essentially volunteers without a public email address. And so we've tried to balance this in different ways. And so I know I think I speak for the board, and I'm not sure how diligently we would be in the habit of practice of checking a state-sponsored email address that was not, particularly because, there's no telling the frequency with which you might get inquiries from the public on this. It might be fairly infrequently. So it might be worth exploring whether or not we can find a way to have an email to that account forward to an account of the board members choosing, so that way they can know that they'd see it. Because I know, I speak for myself, I don't know how often I'm going to check that email. So just saying. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Thanks, Carmen. Mr. Rush?
No, I'm comfortable.
Very good. Okay. So the recommendation from staff was to adopt this update to the electronic communication to make it effective immediately, but then also to publish it and allow for feedback as well. So that's what I intend to do. Do I have any thoughts on that motion?
I
Sorry,
have
no
a
further.
question actually.
Sure.
So let's say I receive an individual email and I feel like, okay, I can respond to this one, but I would also like to let the chair know what I'm saying, just in case it causes some uproar or some problem, so he has a heads up. Is that something that you don't want us to do, or is that something that it's a good thing to do?
In balancing, as Mr. Chair McCarthy said, in balancing it, needs of not unintentionally getting to a quorum and unintentionally violating the open meeting law. It was set up so that your response would be sent to the PIO, would be simple, and so the staff would see it, and if there's any issues, the staff would go forward, discuss that further.
Further questions, comments? Okay, seeing no further questions or comments, then looking for a motion to adopt the change to the board communications policy as presented by staff and make it available on our website for comment.
So,
Second.
Motion from Mr. Russian, a second from Ms. Williams. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Tap. Very good. Okay, we're ready for item 2 under C.
thank you, Mr. Chairman, fellow members of the board. So, moving ahead, my practices and I have one of affirmation with the board. I know we have responsibilities here. I'm not trying to drive you into the administration network, but I think it's important that at least when we get started, that not only am I reporting this way, but I also get your feedback as to things that I think the direction we're going with administrative issues. And I know the biggest and main function is to help us as we move forward with our procurements, and probably more so in my view is how we prioritize those. But I think that I'm one of those that would welcome your opportunity to give me feedback on administrative issues, which is another good reason you have your email address, because if you want to send me a note about, hey, you screwed up at that meeting, I didn't like it, feel free to do so. And just know that it's subject to public record, and often subject to public record. And my lawyer's still here. Yes, she can tell you that. So anyhow, but I appreciate the feedback by phone call or what have you. So part of the process here is that as I walk through steps that I feel I need to take to move your agenda forward and to accelerate our processes and address issues that the legislature is bringing up. I wanted to make sure that you knew the direction I was going. So I'll start off with the legacy project. So I think
For the record, member Bob, join the meeting.
Oh, great, yeah. Oh, Mr. Rhodes, nice to meet you. I'm Andy. So, regarding today, I think there's 353 legacy projects out there. It's my intention to have them all gone by the end of the year. And I think the answer is pretty clear. I think that we need to have closeout dates on these projects. We need to be more communicative with the school districts, and we need to start moving these into the regular process. Get them off our butt. So I think that that's a good place to start. I think the Auditor General spoke to that in their report. Certainly, board members have mentioned that to many occasions. So, do you want me to stop at every one of these, Mr. Chairman, or you just want me to just kind of go right through the list of them here? You open that up.
Sure, yeah, does any board members have any comments or questions on item 2? I know it's a thing we've talked about every
Yeah.
meeting, and
I have a little more
Chair-
detail on it.
Chair, yeah, please
So
proceed.
there's, I think we figured there's about 78 that are active that potentially may need to be reclassified. So this is just a brief overview of the short time I've been here. About 125 that are open but inactive. That represents almost $13 million, by the way. There's about 165 projects that appear to actually be final, final, and we just need to work with the school districts, make sure we're checking the box, and that amounts to about 1.9 million. So there may be some of these resources sitting out there that are again available to us, who's to know. But that'll give you a sense of why I think there's an incentive for us to kind of move through these legacy projects and get them just out of the way so then we can move on with the rest of it. So I'm happy to answer.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned 78 probably need to be reclassified.
Yeah.
Can you, or someone from staff explain what you mean by reclassified?
Yeah, so I think, Matt, these were one of these projects that, they were at one point and then, it slowed down and, something else is missing. And they may either have to come off of, the request, it may not be necessary anymore, or there may be additional items for it, so Matt can.
Chairman, members of the board. So legacy projects.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. Matthew Hanson. I'm the assistant director here at DOA in charge of the Office of Grants and Federal Resources. So the Auditor General's definition of legacy project is awards made before January 2018, and they were processed in the legacy IT environment. And that's the only parameter to legacy versus legacy. That does not mean that those projects are not actively going forward. Many of them have actually been approved by the board for supplemental funding. So to continue to classify them as a legacy project when they're actively in design and construction moving forward does them a disservice. So we want to reclassify them as active, get them into the current IT environment, and then with the other open and active ERG projects.
Understood. Mr. Thompson.
The one question I've had about this process is just that I'm aware of, projects that districts have signed off on that still remain legacy projects. So that's the one part that's confused me is why, if the district has said, and I realize it's staff resources and challenges, but it seems like if the district said, we're okay with this being closed out, that we could move that project off the list and be done.
That's kind of the purpose of this item, isn't it? Yeah, I agree.
Very
good, thank you. So I think the next one, additional auditor general findings. So
I'm sorry, before we move on to three, is there any other comments or questions from the board on the legacy projects themselves? I appreciate the feedback and the specificity on the data here, so we look forward to continue to bring their explicitly.
on the auditor general findings, I think, that I should, we need to move to aggressively, handle those issues as well. I'll be working, just so you're aware, the status of the 16 findings and recommendations in recent conversations with the Attorney General. There's still items pending from the attorney. We met with the Attorney General's office, Auditor General, sorry, and aggressively moving to close out whatever the backlog and recruit outstanding balances are one of the suggestions I think that they were even making. So this goes back to the legacy projects. Working with the grants office here at ADOA to implement some of the standards of grants management styles and policies that we have.
Director Tobin?
Yeah.
Board, I believe we have to vote on item 2 before we go to item 3. They're each individual votes.
I'm sorry, I didn't see
Content.
I didn't see content to vote on.
Just the update of the legacy projects and the direction staff is taking to close them out.
So they're looking for direction to continue to close out.
Right. Well, yeah, at the risk of just making it sound like we weren't directing them to close them out beforehand. Certainly the case. I could see maybe a nuanced motion to say that continue on the path as presented might be tailored.
I think I was hoping that you would just vote all of these at once and just tell me what to do.
Sure.
I'm the new guy, so I really decided to close this out once before. So now that I'm here, then you ought to tell me to do that.
Certainly.
But I didn't know if we were gonna go down the whole list and then you're just gonna vote once, or if we were doing this.
Typically, our condition has been that we voted each item as it's presented on the agenda for clarity's sake. If it would please staff to have a motion from the board, then that.
And I hope you don't feel like I'm asking you to do this, because I don't think you were.
No.
I just gotta like it on the record that the board and I are, we're in unison about the direction I'm taking. I also don't want you to think that I think you're in charge of me to do that. But I think it's kind of like a joint effort because somebody need the open relations.
yes, trying to sort of quickly on the fly think about what the motion might be to do. Okay, so so we're looking for a motion to approve the plan as presented by staff to continue to aggressively close out legacy projects as presented by staff.
So moved.
Okay, so motion from Ms. Wykoff, second from Mr. Rice. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Yes, have it. All right. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chair.
Thank
for
you, Mr. Chairman.
keeping us-
Continuing on with the Auditor General findings, we are targeting July 1st for an e-Civis go live date. I think that there's I think that's going to be a great help to us in the administration as we all be able to be on the same page. And I think the guy who's running e-Civis is Matt Hansen, so I'll direct those questions to him if you have any questions or concerns about how that system works and how we think it'll improve. I'm going to have Matt come up and discuss that with. So at the March meeting, we'll have some of those action items concerning that process and procedure for then, if you want to hold off to that or not. But,
Can you just back up a moment? I don't know that acronym. I'm not sure our audience.
okay, so the e-Civis system is actually our grant system. Mr. Hanson, you want to give a brief history of the e-Civis system?
Chairman, board members, eCivis is actually a commercial name of a SaaS grants management solution. The state first implemented it in 2012 as an enterprise-wide grants management solution. It does both the state as a grantee when we are researching and applying for money, but also as the state as a grantor, either passing through federal dollars or awarding state monies. There are about 50 state agency boards and commissions that are involved in grants management, and we have been systematically onboarding those state agencies. So, example,
Close on date on it.
it is a true life cycle grants management solution, purpose-built for processing grants. It has everything from application receipt, peer review, making awards, subrecipient monitoring, close out, the whole sort of traditional life cycle of grants management. The system is subject matter neutral, so you can do a criminal justice grant, a social service safety net grant, or in this case, a building renewal grant, regardless of subject. It is web-based and just is, our goal is to have all of the state's customers, whether they're a school district that's getting money from the Department of Ed, School Facilities Board, Commerce Authority, State Energy Office, eventually get to the point where they're going to a single portal and using a single solution, so they're not having to learn. I got to go to this website. I got this user ID and password. So that's where we're heading, is to make the state's grants management enterprise as customer friendly as possible for our users.
One question we've had in the past is trying to track from the moment a school district puts in a request to action. Is that something this would allow us?
Yeah, absolutely.
Matt, talk to me about that front end visibility to the users. How much do they see? And is it based upon like a login, you see your grants? And then does the public see something different? Is there a public facing portion of it? Or is it everybody needs a required access to see the grants? Can you talk to me about the different visibility depending on who you are?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. It is a secure front end. So you register as an applicant and you log in and you see your information. You do not see any other school district or any other state agencies, grants. The great thing is if you are a school district, let's say, who's receiving funding from multiple state agencies who are all using eCivis, it's in a single place. It's your desktop, your toolbox in one place. As far as making sort of information transparent or available to the public about the overall BRG or new construction program, we would do that through a data interface out to a public website or some other piece. But this is really intended for the applicants to have visibility and control of their own data and not anybody else.
Is the system, can you manipulate functions that demand communication? Like after so much time, I want auto-generated communication.
Sure. Mr. Chairman and board members, and I'd love at a future meeting to be given the opportunity, either in a work session or an open meeting, to give you a demo of eCivis. Staff has done a lot of incredible work with their solution, and there's pieces of it that we will definitely utilize going forward. The recommendation from eCivis was pretty specific in the Auditor General's report, so we want to be responsive to that. But the entire solution is task-driven. If there's let's say, a requirement for an applicant or a grantee to submit a change order, you put it as a task, you set reminder deadlines, you assign it to individuals, there's automatic emails that go out. So the solution over the course of the life cycle. To Director Tobin's point, something like closeouts are built in as a task. So X number of days after the project end date, the applicant gets a notice, the program manager internally, closeout is due in X number of dates, it needs this, reminder emails go on, and the solution document also has a to-do list. So even if you miss an email, you log into the solution and you see an itemized list of everything that's been assigned to you to do, and it's color coded if it's coming up, current, or past due. So it's pretty user friendly and intuitive, and that's why we think it will improve the state of grants management experience.
I look forward to that demo. I think that would be useful. I'll hold off any further questions I have about eCivis until we see that, Mr. Thompson.
I was just curious if we've started to think about a communication plan with the schools as far as the transition. And I would suggest that you maybe look towards a lot of the organizations that we use, like ASBO or ASA or ASBO or ASBA, because they have a lot of meetings already scheduled where we can get that information out to schools a lot more effectively.
Mr. Thompson, we've already met with Chuck Essex at length and putting together our advisory team. Exactly that.
Great. And then the second question I have, what about legacy? Is that going to are we going to try to pull forward the past into the system, or are we going to cut and run and we're going to have two worlds, or how's that looking at this point? I realize that may not be decided, but it becomes a big issue, obviously.
Chairman, Mr. Thompson, absolutely, and kind of the 8-ball that staff is behind right now is that they're trying to work in two environments, so we don't want to replicate that problem going forward. So we'll put a transition plan in place that eventually gets everybody into the single eCivis environment. The July 1 sort of deadline or target would be to start with all new applications for the fiscal year, and then using API data interfaces and mass uploads and everything, we would get everywhere. Just as an point, in a prior life, I'm responsible for the Volkswagen Dirty Diesel Settlement School Bus Program, of which we used eCivis to get applications from 110 school districts. And step one was schedule a webinar with ASBO to reach as many school districts as possible. And very supportive. So we would definitely put a communications plan similar to that in place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments from Matt?
Thank you for that. I know it sounds aggressive, but I think you can tell we're kind of used to being, in close quarters. So I think we should be able to target date.
And I'm not sure if it was stated, but for the record, I think it's worth noting that that was a recommendation.
Yeah, that's right. So actually, that was the only pieces that I had under that section. I wanted to bring to your attention. So.
Okay.
Item 4.
Item 4.
I think the answer is that I'm hoping that, Mr. Chairman, your discretion, you could do these all at once or you could do one at a time. I'd just like to have us on the record.
Oh, okay. Yeah, oh, I didn't see that before. Okay, I'm sorry that didn't load. I didn't see that before. Okay. So the staff is looking for a motion to approve staff to continue conversations with the AG related to recommendations from the BRG audit and implement changes necessary based on AG recommendations. So, thank you.
Second.
Got a motion from Ms. Rice, second from Ms. Williams. All those in favor? Any opposed? Guys have it. Okay.
So Matt Hanson will be coming back up here a little later, but there's on my next item is, I want to coordinate some improvements. And, recommendations with legislative members as well as the stakeholders. I think we already mentioned ASBO, we've been meeting with them now. And, obviously there's legislation pending, regarding, what the legislature feels is an appropriate place for the school facilities board to end up. I don't know what that outcome is going to eventually be. I like to know that the board welcome my coordination with legislators and the schools to have that conversation. I think you've probably already read the legislation that's outstanding. I've already met with the author and others on this legislation. I think we can see that there's deep concerns. But I would like to say that I'm meeting with them and the board shares my concern about the direction it's going and coordinate that solution together. So the intent of this ask is for the board to direct me to coordinate those improvements and recommendations with legislative members and stakeholders and report back to you. Hopefully I can report back to you sooner than June 30th, but but I put a date in there because I like end dates, if you haven't noticed, but also, in the process to be a part of that legislative discussion on that language. So that would be it.
Questions or thoughts here?
My only question is on the public content of, we're on item 4, right?
That's right.
So the dollar amounts,
I think that,
executive authority, was that
I think that,
part of that discussion?
I think that'll have to be next, right?
Oh,
That is the sub item little 2I, is that for another discussion item?
I don't have that on mine. What does yours look like?
It's talking about the,
Yeah, so forgot that was in there. I actually had that at the bottom. I was gonna have this conversation at the next one. Is that the one with the authorities?
yes, sir.
Okay, so, okay, I was actually gonna talk about that later, but now that's there. So, I believe that there's, right now, I think the board is authorized with the BRGs at $30,000 construction and 50 for new construction. I have it backwards up there. So the recommendation that we had was going to 175 and 250. And the reason I didn't think it was on there is because we don't have any money left over. So I'm really not going down that road right away. And I thought we'd have this conversation later. Go ahead. Yeah. Somebody telling me we're talking about the wrong thing.
Yeah, the title and the content they don't match.
Right. Okay. Well, we can speak to that in our motion, because at least it's in the title and the motion is correct. So, we can still vote on what do you think.
Mr. Chairman, board members, the language under agenda item 4, could it be applied to agenda item 5?
Let's see. Okay, so the content in 4 should be in.
I actually had it under 7 on my notes. That's why I was so confused. I'll leave it at your discretion. Wherever you want to put it.
Okay, so here's what I think. I think we should vote on item 4 and then move the content to item 5.
Could we move that content to item 7, because I know Mr. Hanson.
That's
Matt, are you coming to talk on item 7? Because you have the data on how we came up with the new numbers.
okay.
Where am I from?
I believe I'm talking on 6.
On 6?
Okay.
Okay.
Either I'm happy to move that content to or 7. I think it fits under either. Does anybody have a strong feeling on that, staff? Okay. So for the purposes of item 4, let's complete that one, and then we'll move on to the discussion of the EAs.
Okay, good.
My only thought on the just the coordination with the branch is just sort of affirm publicly that nationally we're an executive agency, and so any coordination we do with the legislature ought to be the direction of the executive branch.
I agree.
The governor's office.
I just don't want you.
I think
the law without you knowing I'm doing it.
Yes, sir. And I just want to make sure that we're going through the appropriate channels and leveraging the executive branch to do that. It's an executive emergency. I don't want the public thinking that we're running our own plays. So,
Right.
not Mr. Chang.
What's the point of this legislation you are talking about, HB or?
There's a House bill under Representative Udall.
Anybody remember the number off the top of their head?
26.
What is it?
2674.
2674. And there's several things out there. So
It's not the only bill, yeah.
Mr. Thompson.
I think folks in the back are having trouble with staff hearing, just because it's going that way.
Okay.
Why?
Yeah, so folks can speak up. Thanks. Thank you. Are some of us mic'd? I can't tell. Is there any mic? There's a lot of things on this desk. I'm sure what's going on. Okay, so let's clean up item 4 and then we can move on. So we're looking for a motion to direct the director to coordinate improvement recommendations for the school facilities board with legislative members and stakeholders as required, and report back to the board by the end of the fiscal year.
So,
Second.
Motion from Mr. Russian, a second from Ms. Williams. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are we on item 5 now?
Yes, sir.
So, and you'll see there's some crossover, I think, between item 6 and 7. I mean, there are additional authorities, but, okay. So on item 5, it speaks to, basically program changes for the remainder of the fiscal year, or remainder of this year. So we're requesting a proposed project period, that will include these ending amounts of application submissions. Incorporate an amount requested to all applications. We'll add a certification related to the 12-month project period. These are items that we already mentioned. We're going to add a risk assessment, including budget pass review. Incorporate selection, prioritization criteria developed collaboratively between the executive director and the board. Require applications to provide information for both program urgency as well as financial need in order to manage limited financial resources for the remaining of the year. So I think these are the same items that we kind of walking through. So these would be our programmatic changes. Any thoughts on that?
Well, sir, I don't have everything on my screen of what you just read. I think I had some of that. Am I missing something? One of the board will correct me.
Chairman, it's in the content, under the content tab. Did you see it there?
So I see the part about implementing a 12-month term. There was it seemed like you were reading a lot more than what I was seeing. So I think
Just speaking on my own notes and
Yeah,
highlighting things for you as we move forward, so I'm open to matching up with.
Right. So correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of this appears to be audit cleanup items, trying to get the BRG back in line with all of the requirements in state law, such as the mandatory requirement that all projects be done in 12 months, et cetera. And so, it's my opinion that you largely have these authorities now, but you're looking for direction from the board to aggressively move to solve these challenges. And so, I can appreciate
So
that.
the overview is that I just think, public to see that the board and executive have to move.
I just wanted to make it clear that I'm trying to unravel, untangle if there was any change to an existing policy that we're making, which I didn't think.
Yeah, we were careful looking. I don't think we saw it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. So just so the board is clear that there's no
Mine turn that to you next meeting.
we're not changing the existing,
Okay.
at least with this motion.
That's right.
Any questions on that? We're basically going to make a motion to direct the director to make these programmatic moves to align the BRG along the Auditor General recommendations. Mr. Thompson.
Well, I just want to remind the chairman and our new director that we've had some discussion around this. It's a little bit of a chicken and the egg argument right now because there are often projects that can't be completed in a 12-month period given the nature of schoolwork.
Right.
And so, I don't know,
So I'm glad.
I understand the recommendation, but I've always had a little trouble with it in the sense of where we're at in operation.
And in the back of my mind, Mr. Thompson, the idea would be for liaisons to be able to have extension authority to a certain level before it comes to the director's level. So maybe the liaisons will have 6-month authority, maybe we'll do it twice until it gets to me for certain criteria for reasons that would make a lot of sense. Then I can report those to the board, give the liaisons some of that authority being that on their own.
Okay.
But once you get so far down the road, eventually it would have to come to the executive director, authorize something that's more continuous than that.
I think the schools would certainly support the idea of having an aggressive time to get projects done, but I just don't want to see projects drop off automatically because of circumstances. So
Right.
I appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Right now, nothing drops up. So we're somewhere between your point and current,
Right.
so I agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions or comments on item 5? Okay, we are looking for a motion to approve item 5 as presented by staff to make the recommended programmatic changes to the BRG for the remainder of fiscal year 20.
Second.
Motion from Ms. Wood, second from Mr. Rice. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Yes, have it.
Thank you. At this point, I'd like to bring Mr. Hanson to talk about the environment that we have now at our grants fund. Probably wouldn't be a good time to do it, looking at eCivis as well. But Matt, I'll ask you to come up on the current funding environment.
Chairman, board members, this is item 6, and I know there's a note on the agenda that's about executive session. I don't think anything I'm going to share requires that, but by all means. So with today's pending board actions, so with the consent agenda and the other items you're going to consider later this morning, that will essentially fully appropriate the FY20 BRG fund. So the almost $80 million that was appropriated for fiscal year 20, the last 10.5 million or so is on your agenda today, essentially zero out the appropriation. There is a remaining balance, or there would be a remaining balance of just under $1 million from prior year projects that have been closed out, canceled. As you know, the BRG fund is lapsing, so that money is not risked. There's also with our aggressive movement to close out legacy projects and non-legacy projects and cancel some projects that might be stalled. There's opportunities in the next several months to recoup easily, about $2 million or even more to sort of bridge the rest of the fiscal year until hopefully the supplemental request is approved. So that money, somewhere between $1 million and $3 million, would be reserved for true emergencies. I know we're about to enter into the warm weather months, and school districts are going to be starting up HVAC systems, and there's definitely a seasonality to the BRG program, and we think there will be sufficient funding to meet those immediate needs in the next coming months. The board and staff have had a past practice of continuing to process applications pending the receipt of supplemental, and we will continue to do so. So we will do as much due diligence and staff work behind the scenes as possible to get those to a point where when and if the supplemental is approved, there'll be a package for the board to consider and forward. So there's a little nuance maybe that from previous years. The BRG applications were actually brought to you for approval pending appropriation. There's actually some language in the state accounting manual that directs us not to over obligate our financial authority. So we will actually hold those applications until there's a supplemental in place to make them. So, it won't slow up the process. All the due diligence, all the work with the school districts and staff will still be done. It'll just be one large package when the supplemental is approved. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Are we still considering kind of a first come, first served on all those pending for that giant board meeting?
Chairman, board members, going forward, I don't think we're considering a first come, first served methodology at all. So it's, we have a lot of work to do with the board, with Director Tobin and staff to truly put a prioritization process in place so that the most pressing needs of school districts are what might have been really important back in July at the beginning of the fiscal year suddenly doesn't look so important in February and March when we're out of money and but we will take all the applications. There's a large body of applications that Ryan has submitted to date that are pending, as well as additional ones that'll come in, and we will prioritize and make those recommendations for your consideration.
Thanks, Matt. You may want to stand here. I was just going to sort of walk the board through. So in recent history, usually come this time of year where we're trying to hold off some funding and doing what we talked about, delaying projects or funding them through design and then holding some construction. This is a little bit different for a couple of reasons. One is there was more money originally, so we got a little farther in the fiscal year than we have in the past. And it also appears that the legislature has a consistent practice of providing a supplemental, which I think means that we have a reasonable chance of getting based upon the past and what it appears to be they're doing. So just looking at timelines, I think it's reasonable to suggest that there ought to be available supplemental funding as early as April, and so that essentially would mean that March would be kind of this month where they'd have to see what we can do with closeouts or unencumbering funds to make the month of April work. But by season March work, so by the month of April, I think there's a reasonable shot something will come through. So that's why I talked to staff individually about what the plan was from a budget standpoint. I felt comfortable with essentially spending down the fund this month, with a little bit in reserve, given that there's likely only to be 1 month where we'll have to sort of stretch the cookie to make that month work. So that's sort of how this is played out.
Are we still thinking about the 2 bins of like emergency and then everything else? Or are we gonna? My worry in the past is if we give them a 1 through 10 and it's not super transparent, we end up opening a can of worms.
We talked also,
Which is which.
some everything about breaking it out into quarters, so we provide appropriation going into the future, so we're not spending a little bit up front as well. Resource, yeah. But I'm new at it. I'm just trying to figure out, choose a few folks who've been and see whether it takes us there. But I think having some sense of having resources all year round, it makes more sense to me as emergency issues come up.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of discussion to be had on, as Matt suggested, to find out how we'll do the prioritization.
So I'm just going to kind of refer to my previous statement. This is why 12 months concerns me. It also concerns, I recognize this is where our authority lies. These are the rules we need to follow, but I'm going to continue to advocate for reimbursement for schools, because by the time supplemental happens, especially as you mentioned, HVAC season, these projects won't get done because they can't in the time frame that's necessary. So it's not a function of everybody not wanting to get things done. It's a function of just the nature of schoolwork, the timing to get particularly HVAC work done when you have to shut down a building for a central plant or something like that. And I just feel like there's kind of a cog in the wheel in the way this all has been constructed. At the point, nobody did it intentionally, but we constantly kind of get up to the summer months and then approve a lot of projects, and then really very little of it can be accomplished because a lot of it centers around HVAC work or even roofing work, which sometimes can be done with school in session, but isn't ideal at best. So I just want to keep advocating for, we need to find a solution that allows work to get done at the time work needs to get done, whether that's a reimbursement process or some other solution. Access this and get it done. Otherwise, we're going to be outside of that 12-month.
Right.
Chairman, board members, so we have lots of ideas for fiscal year 21 and going forward on how to improve the process. What we're talking about right now is just getting out of fiscal year 20. We're kind of talking about two different things when it comes to pots of money. So for those BRG grants that have been made prior, those obligations, the funding is there, reimbursements will continue to exist. School districts will be able to move as aggressively as they want to. This is specific to new obligations, new awards going forward until either money that's been clawed back previously or supplemental comes into play. But we absolutely, in years past, you provided lots of guidance to staff about the buckets of sort of prioritization, and we will certainly use that, and we'll reach out for additional guidance so that the most pressing needs of school districts are being met.
Questions from that? Okay, thank you for that. Item 7. And I don't know if here in item 7, if you want to talk about the content of 4.
Yeah, we can do that. In item 7, I think, some of these things we've already instituted, Mr. Chairman. Basically, we have an ADOA audit that is pending GAO. We have a financial review from GAO and our IT system already. We're performing a 5-year rule review as well to see if we can make some improvements. Mr. Thompson will be in the direction that you're concerned about. And work with SSP staff and, getting our public records series retained. We have, including the Government Transformation Office to kind of see if we can reevaluate the steps we're taking through the process, which is as part of the governor's Arizona management system throughout all our agencies. And staff has already been using this process. I think we just want to re-engage it, get ourselves to a point where we can find where the stop gaps are more clearly, so that we can come back better and have better procedures. So that's basically what item 7 is all about. Did you say you wanted to talk about the
Yeah, you had the EAs were out of order there, but if you wanted to discuss them.
So I'm going to ask Matt to talk about the EA. We came up with a number as well that would elevate the current EA authority that this board has. So wanted to make sure that we were finding something that was conforming and similar. So I'll that.
Mr. Tobin, to be clear, as it relates to the EA authority, did you want the board to move on that today, or did you?
Well, I had expected to, I think I had it included in item 7, but I guess it showed up somewhere else. So
right.
wherever you want to put it is fine. Look, that's why I mentioned, we're not going to be using it right now because of new resources. But, it's your call, Mr. Chairman. I'd be open to it. Why don't you see where we came up with the numbers?
Okay.
Chairman, board members, previously the board has provided the director of SFB executive authority up to $30,000 for non-construction, $50,000 for construction on the BRG program. And that's a tool, as you'll see on today's consent agenda, is used quite often and it's helpful in expediting projects and to board member Thompson's point, letting school districts get the work done when they need to get it done and not waiting 30 or 60 days for a future board meeting for that approval. We are seeing a large chunk of projects that are still in the neighborhood of the 30 and 50, but 65,000, 60, right kind of missing that threshold. Projects that we would love to get moving, but we can't because of that number. Within state government, within the state building system, there's a threshold of $250,000 for construction projects. With the state building system, anything over 250,000 has to go back to the legislature, CCR for review, and that's kind of the threshold throughout state government. So that's where those numbers came from, kind of be consistent with existing state practice. And we think there's a large group of projects that will be able to expeditiously move money out to the school districts and sort of keep these priority projects going by still giving the board, the ability to review and approve sort of quote unquote major construction projects. So that's where the number comes from, and we just think it's another tool in our toolbox to help move these BRG projects along quicker fashion.
So I guess just off the top, I'm not allergic to changing these numbers, but I think it'd be useful to unpack it a little bit. Historically, DEAs have been used when staff thought that timeliness was a key consideration, and so they didn't always use it even when they had the authority to use it. And I think the board largely encouraged them to use it as they saw fit. Is it the intent to not only increase it, but also increase the scope for when to use it? Like not just when it's urgent, but just sort of all the time when it's below that threshold? Is that the intent?
So that is part of it. I have thought about expanding the resources of our liaisons going forward to actually offer them some authority while they're out there on the road as well, rather than wait for them to come back. So I think that I would be using this opportunity to also maybe advance some augmentation of my authority liaisons. So that would be coming back.
Okay. So, I also think it's worth pointing out. I did some research on this when I saw the agenda item come out, and the JCCR approval process is pretty different from a grant process. So I'm not sure it's the best analogy. That if you're going before JCCR, it's with your own funds, not going for a grant. So I'm not saying that I think 30 and 50 are the best litmus tests, but I don't know that we should say that we're following the state protocol when it is apples and oranges. I think that 50 and 30, as I recall, this predates my time on the board. Tom might remember better. It was data driven at the time, where they said, okay, what are these projects that really require speed and urgency? And they tended to be lower dollar projects, and so I think that was why those numbers were chosen. And so I just want to make sure if we do this, we're doing it with our eyes open, and we know what we're doing. There is some tension between the board controlling the purse and staff controlling it, and we want to make sure we get that right, so we're not making it so this is just a show, right? I think that the board has really showed most of its interest in process and procedure, and less interest in like denying individual projects. That would lend itself towards giving more authority, right? If we can still QC the process and procedure and look back and make sure that we like the way things are trending, then theoretically we ought to be able to give more authority. So I think that I've felt more comfortable as we've improved our process and particularly the having more and more documentation. And as we can see the documentation, we can feel comfortable with it. That would lend itself towards giving more authority. So I think there's room for that. I'm just not sure I'm sold on the numbers right now. So that's just where I'm at. So I was going to turn over to Mr. Rice.
I agree too. Increasing the authority, the 30 and 50 seem pretty low to me. 50,000 in a construction project that revamp a room maybe with that, but and I think it'll help streamline the process. I guess the question I have is did you have the time where you're able to look back and say, in the past year,
here's how it would have changed, how many items came to the board versus how many, in that vote.
Chairman, board members, staff can get that for you. Director Tobin's been in place for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I realize, that's right, I realize the time was short, I didn't know if you had.
So, but to Matt's point, again, my view is having a priority for, especially these safety issues, school closures, are like the height of my list anyway. And I'm not so sure that the low numbers that are here now would be enough for me to be able to solve immediate crisis in excess of that. So I'm all right with coming back with numbers to the board. I know I've thrown a lot at you today. I kind of like to get my feet wet in a hurry and start running on the track instead of walking on the sidewalk. So I didn't want to leave anything on the sidelines and have the board say, well, you never did come and ask for more, for more authority. So here it is. So I'm all right if we want to move that and let Matt and I go get you some more data, especially make the chairman feel better. We weren't using that kind of as a guideline, more as a goalpost, I think, for that number. So, but you're settling more into a number that fits into what we're experiencing now in our backlog and our portfolio. We're happy to do that.
And I'm personally, I'm okay with these numbers to, just put something out there and, start moving forward. I realize that, there's not much money to give anyway, so, that's an issue. But I think the important piece is, for the board, frankly, while the board is agonizing over $30,000 distribution, we lose the opportunity to look at the big picture, where tens of millions of dollars are at stake and how we're allocating that to make a real impact. So I really do applaud the effort to give the staff more authority. They're the experts. I think they can make good decisions on these things. And then just that the board has more of the oversight on how is the system working, and are we spending generally the money in the right places at the right time, and are the school districts being effectively served is my interest.
Chairman, board members, fully understand the JCCR process is different. I look at it from the due diligence that's required to get a project to approval, regardless of if it's a grant, a contract, you're using your own money, JCCR. I come at this from very much a grants management perspective, and I look at risk and exposure. And to your point, the exposure is $1 million projects, $5 million projects, new construction. The exposure, when you're talking about state financial resources, is not, $850 hot water heater. So figuring out, and we'll come back with some numbers, but figuring out where that right line is to expedite process, limit the state's financial risk, allow the board to focus on the really important projects.
I'd like to voluntarily pull that off, Mr. Chairman, so out of respect to your position, and then we can come back and have that conversation with the
But, and
it's not going to
Yeah,
affect anything in the next 2 months.
I thought it just might be better just to have the discussion today,
Yeah.
and you guys can come back to us. It's particularly because it may not be super critical for the next 90 days. But I didn't want to indicate that I wasn't personally interested in changing it. I am.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure what number. I think for me, the bigger question is the non-construction number. You think about what we're spending on professional services, it's usually south. The vast majority, very few projects we're spending more than 175 on professional services. And so, and almost everything in the project that gets going is an assessment through the engineering and scope. And so, if all of that can just be done quickly, then by the time you come to us with the project, we're already done, right? It's already ready to go, and now we've got construction. So, honestly, I'm maybe a little bit more interested in finding out what that non-construction dollar amount ought to be. Where are you getting hamstrung? Where is it that you presently cannot solve problems because of that $30,000 amount? What should that $30,000 amount be? Because that I think to me is more critical. Just not having a lot of time to think about it. Mr. Thompson.
For me, I'm not as concerned about the dollar amounts as the process. I'm fully willing to support these dollar amounts, or really whatever you think your best guess is. What I'm looking for is transparency in if that process is going to be denied or not used. We need to know that, and we need to know it quickly. That tends to be where difficulties are with the schools, is they're in limbo land, not understanding, why their project is not being brought forward and getting brought forward for months. So I tend to look at this as let's rule by exception, not by, there's a lot of good work that you could be getting done for schools. I just want to know, and the exception is when you say we're not going to extend that authority for a particular reason. It may be very valid, but that should just come forward and you say, this particular project, we're going to either hold off or put through the regular process because it doesn't fit the bill. It's not a real emergency. I mean, it can be whatever criteria staff determines. I'd like to just see it see the light of day. That's all.
I appreciate that, Mr. Thompson. I would share that I would certainly be very cautious about, those that I approved that may not come and have the approval forward as well. So both sides of this, I expect to be as transparent as possible and communicative as possible.
I think we've had a history. We certainly haven't an issue where we've denied, or had a difference of opinion most of the time on emergency use of the project. And so I feel like the positive aspect of moving forward is pretty clear. The area that I'm concerned about is what are the projects that didn't come forward to the board in the past or were denied executive authority, and we just don't know about it, and schools are left questioning why that has occurred. So that needs to just, for transparency and for trust to be built with this agency, the schools need to know what their status is. They may not be happy with it, but they at least need to know why is one going forward and one getting denied. That's one of the critical issues.
I agree.
Thank you.
There's nothing, Ms. Wyckoff.
I second everything Mr. Thompson said. I think that time period between when a school district puts in an application and then gets a response is one that we've been asked a lot about. So I'm excited about the electronic system and anything you can do to make that more clear. And I love when our board gets to weigh in on issues that actually affect the students rather than a water heater. So I am seconding that all the way.
So, with that, I think maybe we ought to make a motion to ask staff to come back to us with recommended changes on EAs. And do we need a separate motion, an additional motion for item 7?
I'd like an additional motion for item 7, put out the EAs and staff to come back at the next meeting.
Okay. So looking for a motion to authorize the director to make additional organizational changes and to bring back recommended changes to the executive authority for the building grant fund.
So moved.
Second.
Motion Ms. Whitehouse, second from Mr. Russian. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Okay. Believe we are ready for item D and E. This is the single consent agenda that's split into EAs and others. And we have a couple of recusals on item E. We will, I forget, you want me to recuse them first or second? First? Okay. So we recuse Ms. Wyckoff, so we can vote items E18 and E25. Is that right?
Nice procedural.
Okay.
Mr. Cherry, I know we're changing our recusals a little bit. Do I still go stand somewhere or
I believe we're gonna,
keep doing that?
Wyckoff, we're gonna. Yes.
Thank you.
Fair question.
Okay.
Okay. So before we mass motion the consent agenda, we're gonna individually look to approve items E as in Echo 10, and E25 for Tucson and Human Elementary. Any questions, comments, before we proceed on that? Seeing none, looking for a motion to approve items E10 and E25 as presented by the.
I so moved.
Motion from Mr. Rice, second from Mr. Williams. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll bring back Ms. Wykoff and we will introduce Mr. Thompson. And we're looking at items E6 as an Echo 6 for Mesa Unified. Any questions about that? Seeing none, looking for a motion to approve item E6 as presented by staff.
So moved.
The motion from Ms. Williams, second from Mr. Rice. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? You guys have it. Bring back Mr. Oh, excuse me. Are there any other items anyone wanted to strike from the consent agenda to discuss individually? Okay, seeing none, we'll move the consent agenda as a mass motion. So we're looking for a motion to approve items D and E, the consent agenda, less the items we've already moved as presented by staff.
So moved.
A motion from Mr. Rushing, second from Ms. Williams. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? You guys have it. Okay. Mr. Director, we're complete with that, ready for items F, Foxtrot. Adjacent waste validation.
Oh.
Discuss this, but we wanted to.
It's kind of funny because I don't have them on my sheet. Weren't there.
Tucson Unified Jason Roosevelt.
Does anyone have any questions on the adjacent waste validation?
Yes, I'm just reading them. Mostly because obviously I'm spending a little more time on the other policy issues.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. She got to slow down. Take a break.
Oh, it's just the one. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Just getting used to the
That's fine.
steps here, you know.
Yes, sir.
No, it's on this side, right? Is it just- It's like a minor detail, cut off some, but I'm gonna go ahead and ask for Sherry to go ahead and discuss this.
Is there, I mean, all the information appears to be in order, so if you have any additional detail to provide. We have an adjacent waste validation for Tucson Unified in the amount of $249,000. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, seeing none, we're looking for a motion to approve the adjacent waste validation for Tucson Unified as presented by staff.
So moved.
The motion from Mr. Rice, second from Ms. Williams. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? You guys have it. All right. We have a reduction in square footage, item G.
But have Amber go ahead and do that.
Mr. Chairman, Director Tobin, South Mountain Unified used to be an elementary school district with one elementary school, Ruth Fisher Elementary School. One of the buildings at this school contains an indoor Olympic-sized pool. Years ago, the voters elected to unify and subsequently approved bonds to build a high school adjacent to the elementary school. In 2005, the board considered the district's request to exclude the square footage of this building, but the item was tabled. The board subsequently approved the district's request to reconfigure this building from K-8 to 912. The district is currently requesting exclusion of this building as it is not used for PE or any other after-school programs. However, it does serve the school as a backup water supply storage tank for the fire suppression system. So staff is not recommending exclusion of this space as the district is projected to exceed capacity at the 912 level in FY26. The district is also requesting reduction of square footage at the K-8 level at Ruth Fisher Elementary School. Due to the replacement of 3 buildings, the replacement square footage does not fully compensate for the square footage of the 3 demolished buildings, resulting in a net reduction of approximately 5,500 square feet and 55 student capacity. The district is projected to exceed capacity in FY '27 at the K-8 level. Approval of this request would not impact the timing of that, of their need for space, but it would affect the size. But staff is recommending approval for this reduction of square footage. The state could realize some benefit by not needing to fund repairs at these 3 older buildings that have been demolished. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson, for the analysis on that. I realize these are difficult decisions that are not made easily. Are there questions from the board on either of these projects? Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I have a question. I know we have dealt with similar issues before. We did one for union, and I think the recommendation was not to approve the request for reduction of square feet, and ultimately we decided to change that. And this one, I know the reason you cited is this is going to change the size of a future new school. Is there another reason other than this reason that we might the state might be on the hook for funding a larger school? I mean, the swimming pool is not used. Does the law say anything about the swimming pool? Does other schools have swimming pools that we include as academic space?
Mr. Chairman and Dr. Chang, yes, other districts do have pools that are counted in our square footage unless the square footage was funded by bonds and does not exceed the district's excluded space threshold. The reasoning is that the state would not benefit from excluding this space. It would still be, the state would still be liable for any repairs on this building through the emergency program, not the BRG program.
Even if we exclude the space, we're still on the hook for repairing that?
Correct. Mr. Chairman and Dr. Chang, the excluded space is eligible for emergency funding.
Ms. Peterson, how often, we don't usually see much emergency funding. I mean, most of our appropriation or our grants are energy. I'm a little concerned because if they built a water tank, it wouldn't be educational space. It seems like there's no municipal water, you need a sprinkler. If they built an outdoor concrete pond, it would be educational space, it's not heated. I don't know, it seems like a weird catch-22 for them since they're not on city water. But I'm just throwing it out there, it's hard to put desks in the pool. No, I'm teasing, but not.
It's right.
Yeah, I guess same question comes to my mind. How is, if it's, the pool's not used for any educational purposes, how can the space be educational space? And so if they are gaining more students, to just say, well, it's educational space, go put in the pool. That's simplifying it. I know it's more complex than that, but I guess, is there anyone here from Saddle Mountain to represent that or has it? I guess not. I guess just, is there, what would it take to change that to educational space, given it's a pool and it's, to really make it
But
educational?
I don't think it's educational, it's academic space. Of course, academic space is a catch-all,
Yeah, well, academic,
so.
which implies
that
you're
supports.
using it for some educational purpose.
So if
Not
we
necessarily, I mean, like, there's a lot of space that's not used for education that is considered academic space because it supports the academic space, like a principal's office, for instance, is academic space, so
if it's used
it's not as narrow as you're speaking to.
So this would imply that there's like office space or something in there other than the pool that could be pooled is not really.
I think it's more generic than that. I think it said it supports academic
Yeah.
space, so it counts as academic space.
To do one, it's kind of like a water tower at this point.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe if it's used for academic purposes like a gym, that would be considered academic space like this one, it's cool, but it's not used as a.
Sure.
So, and I guess this thing cannot really use it because it's not needed.
Yeah, I think when it comes to this stuff, the first question is, what does the law tell us to do? What are we supposed to be doing here? And and the second question is, are we, if we did something for someone, would it be unfair if we didn't do it for another? That's the two questions. I mean, it very well might be that we have the authority to do this per state law, but it's not prudent because you're opening Pandora's box. So I think that's always kind of where we come down on these reduction in square footage. That are we encouraging behavior that would be more deleterious than 96 students? 96 student capacity isn't going to be probably too big of a deal, but it might be that, well, we have a difficult time telling another district that we're not going to, get rid of 1,000 student capacity, which would be a really big deal. I think that's oftentimes how these discussions roll downhill. So, that in mind, Amber, what are your thoughts on
Sure.
on this part?
Well, Mr. Chairman, so the law does not specifically address swimming pools or swimming pool buildings. It does say that space used for district administrative purposes may be excluded, and staff did not interpret this as a district administrative space.
But the real issue is when growth occurs, how large is the school that's going to, or how the space that needs to be built to accommodate the students? Isn't that the real issue here? And if we take this out of the academic space area, we will spend more money and build a larger base for students. Is that what we're really talking
Or
about?
it's the timing of the qualification too.
Right. But ultimately, the timing and
And then size.
So I guess it seems like if we leave it as academic space, we'll build later and smaller.
I think that's fair.
But part of that implies that whole building is usable for those kids in the future, which it just doesn't feel like would be. I mean,
But that might be a useful question. What was the district's interest in removing from classification the academic space?
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's so that in order to advance the need of the school that will likely be conceptually.
And was it, I'm sorry if you already said this, but for the high school space, how far left would it move it, or would it move it left here?
So yes, by 1 year.
26 to 25?
Exactly.
Is that what I'm saying? Okay. So it moves them left a year to fiscal 25 projection, which of course that's a projection, and we should say for the record that that's a projection. We don't know.
Yeah, and that could always change. The lesson.
Yeah, well, and Central Mountain too. I mean, there's a lot of potential growth out there. Who knows what's going to happen out? It's probably one of the biggest school districts in the state size-wise. That is like the size of Massachusetts. Okay. Seriously. It's huge. Mr. Thompson, were you winding up over there?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask her, I'm assuming the school district knew this was on the agenda today, is what your recommendation is. I mean, we've been talking about it for a while, right?
We have, it was originally scheduled, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Thompson, this was originally scheduled for the December 11th board meeting. The district requested to be pulled off that agenda so they could come and meet with us. They did come in, we did have a discussion with them, and they were aware that we would not be changing our recommendation. And I did encourage them to come, but they were, all districts were notified yesterday that the agenda was available.
So just, I just remain, I always struggle with these when districts, and I hope this, and I'm asking you to say that because I know that to be true, but I struggle in a district that if they've got a concern, they should be at this meeting, and if they don't, then I'm assuming they have somewhat agreed with staff's recommendation to move forward, and I always struggle with that because I know it's not always easy for districts to get here. but it's really hard to know when we can't hear their side of the story. If there's anything else to add, so it feels like there's a tacit approval by them by not showing up. That may be unfair, but it has been the way I've consistently looked at these kind of recommendations. So.
I'm not sure it's fair to draw any conclusion about them being here or not. I think we ought to vote based on what we think makes the most sense. So, I mean, I see what you're saying, and they probably ought to advocate for themselves, but I'm personally not going to read into it that way. I mean, I just for the record didn't want to suggest that, you know, we're less likely to take their side if they're not here. So anyway, that I just wanted to put that out there. But sensing that there's some hesitancy on this recommendation, I think our options here are to accept staff recommendations, or to table it, or to vote to approve the request. I think those are our three options. I'm on these recommendations because I am not smart on this. I'm always tempted to take staff recommendations, who's had a lot more time to study it than I do. So that's kind of where I'm at. But if somebody wants to make a motion to either table it or to approve the reduction of the 912 space, I think now would be the time to entertain that motion.
Mr. Chairman, once again, Mr. Thompson, I don't know enough. I'd like to hear the other side to make an informed vote on it, so I'd probably abstain from at least the denial.
Sure.
I just want to say one more thing for the record. So we always cite the possibility or the probability of a school being moved forward or the size becoming larger as a concern. To me, that's not really a concern. We should consider this case by case. If the situation warrants the reduction, we do it, regardless of the impact on future school. And I think that should be the position. I know you may not necessarily agree, but I just want to put it on the record. I think that should be a separate consideration, whether they're going to qualify for a larger school. That's a separate issue. And we want to look at this issue at hand. If we need to reduce the square footage, that's what we did for Yuma, and we agreed that that second floor, you're not going to be able to use it for a student purpose because you don't have an elevator. It does not meet the ADA requirement, and we decided we're going to reduce the square footage, which caused some headache later on. But I think we did the right thing. For this one, I'm not sure if it is, it's warranted that we reduce the square footage. Again, we want to hear the story from the district, but I don't want the other considerations to be in our way of either approve it or not approve it. So I move to take one. Okay. No, go ahead. I thought you wanted to say something.
Oh, I just have another question. Do they want to remove from the square footage because they want to eventually get rid of the pool? Was there any comment about that in your discussion?
No, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Williams, no. I should say there was some discussion about possibly if the building were to be demolished and the district built a water tank, staff would likely be supportive of that reduction of square footage because the square footage would go away and there would be no liability for the state. But that is not their.
Water tank. Which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
This problem has been going on according to the records here that I have in front of me since 2005. It was 15 years that it's languished. And I mean, that's the original letter that was sent to Executive Director Bill Bell, which was prior to my coming on board. And I think we need to take care of this. And I also feel that its use is as a water reservoir, and in the interest of our state's interest of the buildings, without that water reservoir, we're at risk of having a fire. So I'm going to propose that we approve this request. I'll put that in the motion.
Motion to it. There's a second from Mr. Rice. Is there any further discussion or questions on the motion? motion is to approve just item 2 of the, instead of the 912 square footage reduction. Okay, see no further to questions or comments on that. All those in favor?
Aye.
All nays? Nay? And it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. So 7-1 vote, the chair being nay. The motion passes. Okay, I think that makes number 1 a little easier. We're looking for a motion to approve the reduction of cage square footage on buildings 1003 at Ruth Fisher Elementary as presented by staff.
So moved. Second.
Have a motion from Ms. Wykoff, second from Ms. Landon. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Here's the ayes have it, unanimous vote. Okay,
What was the second for that?
Ms. Wykoff and Ms. Landon, the motion and the second on this second one. Okay, with that, we're gonna take a 5-minute bio break.
So.
That is.
You voted against.
To approve item 2.
My record changed. It makes more sense.